The Christian Association for Survivors of Suicide Loss is pleased to present our podcast, Reaching for Hope with Joy Osborne. Let's join Joy and her guests as they discuss topics of relevance for emotional and spiritual wellness.
Welcome back, friends. In this episode, we are excited to continue our discussion about boundaries. And let's talk a little bit. I think most of, not all of us, went to church, grew up in the church, are currently in a church. How about boundaries at church? Have you run into any situations where you had to establish boundaries?
I didn't have to establish the boundary myself. More so it was my parents, because my dad was a pastor at a church. And being the pastor's kids, obviously we weren't perfect children. We were still children. So whenever we would act up a little bit or things like that, sometimes other church members felt like it was their place to correct us as well. And I know my dad sometimes especially had to step in and say, no, they're my children. I know that I'm the pastor. These are the pastor's children, but that does not make them your children.
Wow, I would have never imagined.
Yeah.
Something you don't think about.
Yeah, sometimes people just think that they have the right to correct children that are not theirs.
Right. I know for me, boundaries also, at church, were not overcommitting. We talked about that at work, because at one point I was involved in every single thing. They kept asking me, and I kept saying, sure, because I thought it was what God wanted me to do.
Right, yeah.
And I got to the point, similar to what you said, Lloyd, burnout.
Yeah.
And when you get to the burnout stage, you don't set that boundary, you're not probably the best person to be around at times. And not as effective.
Yeah.
So I've had to learn to set boundaries and only do certain things, even though my personality is to help as well, like you, Diana. I want to help other people. I want to be there. I want to be able to do whatever, but I have to know that there's a boundary set there as well to protect myself.
I've had an experience with maybe someone who, and again, because your desire is to serve, and you're like, well, I'm serving others, I'm doing what God has called me to do. But setting those boundaries when people are expecting you to solve all of their issues or calling you for every single one of their problems.
Yeah.
And I had to set that boundary and really come to the realization that, okay, I'm not Jesus.
Right.
It's my job to point them to Jesus, but not to solve every issue.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a delicate balance in ministry.
Yes.
Is that you're trying to help people, but you don't want them to be dependent upon you, but on the Lord.
Yeah.
So those boundaries, and some people are not going to accept the boundary. Some are going to try to push against the boundaries, but standing firm, like we said, to keep your boundary. Because if you let them push the boundaries and you try to establish a boundary again, they're probably going to say, well, Joy's trying to do that boundary thing again. It's not going to work,
Yeah.
because I got my way last time kind of situations.
Yeah, that's something I definitely had to learn as well, because being a pastor's kid, I kind of ended up being a part of everything. So then when I got older, for a time, I kind of stepped away from everything for a little bit when I was in college and had to kind of rework what my level of commitment to things would be. Just because I'd felt like I had to be a part of things for so long, and then learning to choose to do things. That was an interesting transition for me. And I still, to this day, almost overcommit myself all the time because I'm so used to doing so many different things. But I'm having to learn to say no, and I'm not going to hurt anyone's feelings by saying no to doing everything, because I don't think anyone truly expects you to do everything.
Right.
I'm glad you said that, because it's like we're preaching to the choir. It's like, here we're talking about boundaries, but we do struggle with that overcommitment.
Right. I think it's God's work.
Yeah.
Back to guarding our hearts and making sure we have healthy boundaries.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, if you even think about it too, when God created everything, he did take a day to rest and to show us the boundary for how we should work in our lives, that we need rest.
Yes, absolutely.
I like the way that he did it too. It's all, split up into different segments of things. And I feel like we can do that with our lives. And you have this time that you're going to support the church and do different things. And then like you have this time for family and you know, you just have like an organized kind of schedule for different things. And I think that's healthy, you know, it's a healthy way to do things.
Yeah, God is definitely very organized, I've noticed from reading the Bible.
I don't know. Have you guys heard of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
I have that book.
And-
Stephen Covey.
Yeah.
And then the illustration that he does with the jar and the big rocks. So you take this jar, right, and you put in the big rocks. Those are the things that are most important to you, right?
Yeah.
God, your family, your self-care. And then you add the sand, and it's going to fill all those little spots. Those are the things that, you know, everything else, right? But you have to identify those big rocks, the things that really matter to you.
Yeah.
I like
yeah.
that. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on social media because you kind of said something there about social media and taking a break from it. We have like this new sort of algorithm, I guess, like TikTok and Reels and stuff, where you just get content all the time, you know, it's just like random different things, different topics, situations. Everything in the world that's happening right now, you can see on social media. And I feel like that can't be healthy for you, you know, it just can't be healthy for your mind to like see the bad, the good, the ugly, everything just all the time. And I feel like for me, I've been having to say, okay, I'm going to look on TikTok or Reels or something for this amount of time and that's it, you know, and in fact, I'm not going to look at these specific things. I just want to see cats doing weird, funny things and that's it.
Yeah, I think it's crazy now that I've even seen on different platforms that people are live streaming traumatic events happening in the world.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of crazy how close we are to everything. So I think putting boundaries in place for social media and even the news and things like that is healthy as well. Because you can only take so much bad news at once. And we never before had the capability to know what was happening all around the world all at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's pretty new, so I don't think that people think about setting boundaries in those situations as much either.
That's good because we've heard many people are, or in the statistics, we've seen that a lot of people are not as happy as they used to be. And I kind of wonder if that plays into it. Where are we spending our time? What are we devoting to our time? What are we allowing in our minds? Is it positive? For me, I'm glad you said that. Mine is I want to have healthy boundaries, and I'm not going to with the news and such. I don't watch it. And I'm happier, and I feel like that's something I set for myself, is that I'm trying to remove the things that are not healthy for me emotionally, my own self boundaries. Because I know what triggers me. I know what will make me feel anxious and things like that. So that for me personally definitely resonates with me, is that because when I would listen to it, I'd be so upset, so unhappy. And I'm like, you know what? I want to focus on the good in the world because I know that there's a lot of good. So my boundary is, okay, I've set my own personal boundary. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to devote my time to this. Do I want to be ignorant to what's going on? No, I'm not. I can read for myself and find different outlets. But it's made me a happier person. And I don't know if you guys experience the same type thing.
Yeah, I think that what you just said is important. Is when you want to read or want to watch the news or something, that's when you take that time to do it. But these platforms, you know, it's just popping up. So you gotta be like, no, I don't want to see that right now.
Right.
And Joy, what you said just reminded me of kind of like self-awareness, because I cannot compare your boundary with mine and say, oh, I want that boundary. You were aware of what you needed. So like I can relate because, you know, I've struggled with fear, you know, and sometimes anxiety. So it's like that self-awareness is like, is this going to be good for me? It's watching the news constantly, because I did that. You know, that was not serving me well. So I had to set that boundary. I'm like, now I don't even turn on my TV. And, you know, there are times when people judge me. You don't even know what's happening in the world. You know what? This is what keeps me sane.
I know, right?
So
Yeah.
I have to look out for myself.
Yes. I think really the most important thing to setting boundaries is knowing yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't
Yeah.
know yourself, you don't know what you can and can't handle. And I'd say that's personally something that I still work through as well. I'm still younger. I'm 26, so I still got a lot to learn. So I'm still continuing to learn and grow and know myself and know what I can take and not.
Right.
Know thyself.
Yes.
I like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And that takes time. That takes time alone and allowing God to, reading the scripture, allowing God to speak to us. Real self-evaluation is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I'm always going to bring up a journal. Sometimes people need to do that to know
Yes.
themselves and then to establish and pray about, God, where should I set the boundaries if you're not sure? And like Diana, you said, getting other people involved in our lives. There's a lot of books on this topic. We have a lot at our disposal, but bringing awareness to what a boundary is, being safe in our space, right?
Yeah.
That is the key.
I want to
Yeah.
ask a question. So let's say somebody doesn't even realize that they need a boundary. Like, how do they even, let's say like somebody is just, how do I know that I need a boundary? What would you guys say?
I would say a few things. One is, if they were asking me personally, I would say, okay, so let's talk about that. So does it bring you peace? Is it something that's healthy? Is it draining you? I mean, what is the effect of that on
Okay,
you?
yeah.
And then, I know as Christians sometimes we want to just pray about it and God will reveal.
Yeah.
That's true. That is true. But also, like you said, other people that might be, sometimes people can see things differently from a different perspective than
Yeah.
we do because they're not in the moment. And that's why I have friends that I'll call and say, help me understand what I may or may not be doing. When I was going through a lot years ago, I had various people I trusted that were wise, that were godly. And even I went to counselors, that would help me see things in a different light. And I wanted their input on the situation because sometimes we think we're doing good things and it's really unhealthy and we don't know where was that boundary to be set, or we maybe wouldn't even call it a boundary. What should I do in that situation? How should I approach that person? What have you found? Those types of questions are what I would ask people to help me, and then I would pray before I did approach the person.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how that happens when you pray, Holy Spirit, reveal to me when's the best time to address this, and every single time it was like, now's the time. I had
Yeah.
that peace of
Yeah.
knowing that I had to establish that for safety reasons, for emotional health, physical health.
I think
Yeah.
talking to other people is probably the best way, as you said, to know if you need to establish boundaries. Because actually, when I had some toxic friends in college, I had a counselor that I spoke to, and that was the first time that someone told me, you can remove these people from your life. You don't have to be their friend anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that if I hadn't spoken to someone else and how they treated me and things like that, it wouldn't have occurred to me at that moment, I can just remove people from my life if they're really not doing me any good.
That's good.
Yeah.
I want to ask you all about a situation and how you think you would handle this or give advice to people on how best to handle this situation. So there's a couple who are married and their in-laws keep coming over, or they keep calling, or they keep getting involved in your life and they're not respecting boundaries. What advice can we give them?
That's a hard one, Joy.
Yeah.
That's a hard one, especially with in-laws, because we're always concerned that we're going to hurt their feelings, or the relationship is going to be severed.
Right.
For us, I guess we were in the midst of it.
You had this situation in your
Of that
life?
situation, unfortunately. There were no boundaries. That really affected our marriage tremendously. It didn't come until years later that we realized, and actually it was during a prayer and fasting at our local church that God revealed that. And my husband was receptive to receive those words in terms of, this is how it's affecting me.
That's good.
But he was, I guess, during that time of prayer and worship and fasting, the Lord had already softened his heart to be receptive to speak about that. And then we were able to establish those boundaries because of the effect that was having on me.
So how did they handle those boundaries? Did they respect them, or did it take a few times for them to get it?
I guess after clearly communicating what the effects that were having on me, then we both came up like what works for you. Like my husband was really receptive, and he was like, what works for you? What do you want to see happen?
That's good.
So I mean, that could have been something as simple as like, how many days can you handle this person coming over? Okay, so instead of being a month, what does it look like? 7 days, 10 days? That's a simple one, that it was like, okay. But again, he was receptive, but it took years for both of us to realize, because we didn't want to hurt that other person's feelings. We were more concerned about hurting that person's feelings instead of what it was doing to our marriage.
Protecting yourself.
Yeah.
So did they receive it well, the in-laws?
Actually, they did.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't know we were placing boundaries.
Oh, it's how we say it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean,
how you say it.
that's
Yeah.
funny because when I think about like they receive it well, yeah, because they never knew we were actually setting
Yeah.
boundaries.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like with some situations too, when you set boundaries with anyone, sometimes they didn't even realize that they were hurting you at all.
Yeah.
So when you communicate
Yes.
to them, this is what's been going on and this is what I would like to see happen, sometimes they're very apologetic for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Sometimes we don't communicate that need.
Yeah.
And we're making assumptions
Right.
that, okay, they were not, maybe they don't know they're being overbearing.
Correct. Yeah.
And we feel that way. But if we don't clearly communicate, again, in love.
How would they know?
Yeah, if you don't say it.
exactly. How do they know?
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. Well, there's a show years ago, I'm just going to throw this out here. One way they handled boundaries, what they did is and this is in the country, okay, we're talking many years ago, but it's still the same point. What they did is they said, if I have this flag or this thing on my porch, that means you can come visit me. Yeah. And if it's not there, it was that boundary they set for their
Okay.
quality time because they lived
Yes.
so close to their family, but they also needed that personal space.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
And
Yeah.
they respected that. I thought it was really cool. Now, we're talking many years ago.
Yeah.
If you want to put a flag out, you can do that.
I would totally forget to either put it out.
Yeah, that does show the clear communication of the boundary.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
But
that's-
they let each other know, right?
Yes.
So that's
it's the whole
that's
family
what
that
we're
was
talking
coming over
about.
at this time in this example. But because they were so close to the oldest sister, and they were just when people are brought up a certain way, and that's how their family did it.
Yes,
Sometimes they don't
yes.
understand that. Hey, it may have been good for when we
Yes.
growing up, but this is what we need in our life.
Yeah. That's good because we have to consider the cultural background too.
Correct.
Yeah, because I come from a Latino family, so it's like you don't have to announce yourself; you just show up at the house.
Yeah.
But then after
Yeah.
being here for a
Yeah.
while, then things change.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm one. I love you, but let me know when you're coming.
Yes, that's how I grew up too.
Yeah.
Our family always needed someone to let us know that they were coming over before they did. So I grew up seeing that. So, of course, that carries on into my adult life as well.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as people clearly know that boundary, that I need to respect that and other boundaries
Yeah.
that you might
Yeah.
have, of course. Like you don't want people coming in your house looking through your drawers and closets
right.
and things like that. That'd be embarrassing on my part, but
Yeah.
but that's good.
All of this, like self-preservation, for me personally, felt like I'm being selfish. And I think that's one of the reasons younger me did not create so many boundaries, because it's like I'm being selfish. instead of helping or giving that time to someone. But I feel like you can't show love to someone unless you love yourself.
That's good. Really good. We could have a whole podcast. That's
Yeah.
really good. So, what if the spouses don't agree with the boundaries with the in-laws? How would we approach that, or suggest people approach it?
Wow, that's a hard one.
It is.
The only thing that comes to mind is that scripture where that if you're having a conversation, I don't know exactly where it's coming from. I apologize for that, but where it says that if you see your brother in sin and you come to them and they don't see it, then go and grab a third witness. And then, so, you kind of want to have that third party that is maybe more objective,
Right.
and perhaps somebody that you can trust and bring him in. Maybe that can be an elder of the church, somebody you trust, a mentor,
Right.
your pastor that perhaps will have that objective view, and then help realize, like, why do you not want to agree to the boundary? What's going on? What's
Right.
really happening here?
Yeah, and I had a situation like that where I went to a counselor with my spouse, and they were telling the counselor certain things, and I was sitting there and I'm like, well, that's not, we talked through, And the counselor agreed with me, actually. And he didn't like it. My spouse didn't like it, so therefore he was still pushing against it. Oh,
Yeah.
they're just saying that to me, whatever. So that was a challenge for me, but I had to continually go back to him and say, this is why I need this. I had to continually, sometimes it takes that, because sometimes people aren't going to agree. Well, you're just saying that, and it's not true, because I lived that life for a long time. But I had to keep going back to what I've said a lot in this podcast, is that I had to keep going back to God and saying, God, you need to help me in this.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't know how to break through, and only you can break through and show me what I am to do, what I am to say and not to say in certain situations. And after a while, boundaries were set, and I was feeling safer in that, for that boundary.
Yeah.
So sometimes it does take more than once, but it's how you approach it,
Yeah.
when you approach it.
When ultimately we don't have control over anyone else
That's
but
correct.
ourselves.
Right, right.
That's correct.
So even if that person disagrees to the boundaries that we need,
Yep.
there's, we're going to have to do something about ourselves. So even if that person is here because I didn't agree to the boundaries, then I have control over what I do.
Right.
So I have that self-control. I can say, okay, then, during this time, I'm going to be out from this time to this time, or I'm going to meditate or do more, whatever it is that
Yeah.
you're going
Right.
to do,
Yeah.
because we are only in control of ourselves.
That's
I
correct.
can't
Yeah.
change that
Yeah.
other person.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's a lot of things we have to keep reminding people, and especially with boundaries. You're not changing the person because you can't. You're changing behavior or acceptance of what you need as a safe space.
And I think also, too, things don't always have to be solidly one thing or another. And that's where you can be flexible also in your relationship and see if there's a compromise
Right.
between what the two of you
good.
want for that.
Yep.
So it could mean, I don't know, maybe it's some weeks if for the dropping by portion. Sometimes maybe they could come over more in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
And then other weeks they won't come on by at all. So you just have a little bit of that give and take between the two positions on there.
Yeah. I was gonna say the exact same thing. It's finding that middle, and it can get complicated, but you can do different things. Like you said, you can leave and go do something you want to do while they're there, or you can say, okay, these are the weekends I'm okay with them coming over. There's a bunch of different answers that you can find. You just got to talk until you find something that can work for the both of you.
Yeah.
Right.
Like there'd be certain things, like if this is okay with me telling, that there'd be some situations where when I first came into the family, it was pretty much expected that everyone hung out with each other every Sunday afternoon. Pretty much everyone just went over to his parents' house. It was a normal thing. But sometimes I wasn't as used to that, because Sunday afternoons, was usually nap time and unwind time and not communicate with a bunch of people time.
Right.
So after some time, we kind of had to compromise and say, okay, so we'll go these Sundays, but these Sundays will be just our time
Oh, that's good.
to relax and unwind, because it's been a long week. So sometimes it can be a little much.
And that solution is keeping both parties happy, you know, in a sense. So I feel like that's a good compromise.
Yeah. And you didn't have to say, oh, by the way, I'm setting a boundary, you know.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
You approached it in that
In
manner.
a very
the way you
stealthy
approached
way.
it.
Yes.
And I like what Kelsey said, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, that it's not, there's an in between. It doesn't have to be this or that. Let's find maybe a creative way.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I had a friend who didn't get along with her mother-in-law, so she didn't want her to come over at all, you know, but her husband wanted her. So instead, you know, first they said, okay, what works for you? So they decided, okay, she can come over, but not stay at her house. And they would rent a hotel room for her, the closest hotel room, and she would stay there at the hotel room, and then they will pick her up whenever, you know, and she could spend the day at the house, and then they would drop her back at the hotel. So I mean,
Great idea.
yeah, that's a creative way, you know.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great example. Here's another situation I'd love to get your feedback on. What if you've set boundaries and people are not respecting them? How would you approach that?
I think it depends on the person that you set the boundary with.
Okay.
Of course, if they're a family member, you may have to stick firmly to that. And of course, you're not going to just cut them off most of the time because they are your family.
Right.
So I think you just need to hold firm to that. And then with the situations that I've had with family members is that I set a boundary that if they started to talk to me in a way that I did not like, I would have to stop communication right then and there. So that was my boundary. If they crossed it, I was done talking to them at that moment.
That's good.
I wasn't going to cut them off from my life forever, but I would step away for a little bit, gather myself, because I didn't want to get to an angry
Right.
spot with them,
Right.
which I knew would happen if I let them cross that boundary. So definitely holding to your boundary and the consequences. And then, of course, in other situations with friends, if they just kept stepping over my boundaries, I let them go as friends because that was what was best for me in that situation. They weren't offering anything positive to my life, so I let them go.
You
Yeah.
guarded your heart.
Yeah. I feel like you have to take those actions, unfortunately. Like if, you know, you're having issues with your in-laws or whatever and they live close, I feel like you got to think, okay, well, what do we do here? You know, do we move a little further away? Like what actions can we take
Yeah.
to ensure that the boundaries are being observed? And it's unfortunate because you lose friends, you lose closeness with family members, you know, but you gotta, for your self-preservation, you have to take actions.
Yes.
And you have to be willing, like Kelsey said, sometimes to go through the painful process
It's not easy.
of letting go. And that's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it hurts, but I hold on to, you know, that song that says, God gives and takes away.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because otherwise it's painful. It's going to be painful. You're going to
Yes.
lose some friends and even some family members.
True.
And you
True.
just pray that sometimes we feel that even with forgiveness, that forgiveness has to mean that we're going to be, the relationship is going to be the same way it was, like restoration, and it
Yeah.
doesn't.
Right. Right.
So I feel the same way with boundaries. Like even if that person doesn't like it, maybe the relationship will be restored in the future. It would
Yeah,
be maybe
yeah,
at a
yeah.
distance
Right.
and not as close as it was before. But it's okay. You
Yeah.
know?
Right.
And God will give us strength to overcome the loss of friends. And I don't know.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, I had a situation years ago as well with an in-law, and every time we were around this person, they would step over boundaries, and really caused my spouse to be very upset. And so finally, I approached her, and I was very firm, and I was very honest in that boundary and how it impacted me and what she was doing and impacted him. And it went well. At first it wasn't, and then I'm like, I have to stand firm to this because it was not healthy, because what she was doing was causing pain for my spouse and myself. And so I felt that's what I needed to do, and she did respect the boundary. It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
Confrontation, some people don't like. You don't want it to be confrontational. Sometimes people will perceive it as confrontational. But you have to do what it takes to have your own safety.
Yeah.
And like we keep saying, emotional and physical.
Yeah. And I think it's always the hardest to place boundaries with family members because you're their family. I feel like some might think they deserve full access to you when I don't believe that to be true. And that's something I didn't know as a child and a teenager as well, having those issues with family members. And that I also learned that there are some circumstances which I haven't had to resort to, but I do believe that if a family member is very aggressively disturbing your peace and boundaries, it is okay also to let go of relationships with family members as well. You'll still love them, you still care about them, but you hold them out at an arm's length, because if they get too close to you, they're just not providing you any peace, and it can be toxic situations at times.
Yeah.
That's the
totally
key
agree.
word, I think, toxic. That's not doing you any good.
Right.
Yeah, it's really good.
Well, we've discussed a lot about boundaries, many different types of situations, and advice on how we would work through things. But I want to also emphasize that when you're going through situations, make sure that you take it to the Lord. We also mentioned, maybe there's other people you need to talk to help you establish boundaries. And there are a lot of counselors and therapists that can help in those areas as well. And we hope that you all will seek that if you need that in establishing your boundaries. So thank you, Lloyd and Diana and Kelsey, for joining in the discussion today. I know that it's been very eye-opening for me, and I pray for all those others who are listening.
Thank you, Joy, for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening. For more information, visit www.suicideloss.org. That's suicideloss.org. This presentation was not intended as a substitute for professional care. Please see a counselor or physician for your individual needs. Subscribe and like so that you never miss an episode.